Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of the Ringlers from around the world. It's a pleasure to see you all this lovely morning for me. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Jackie. A little quick bit of background on me. I graduated from Yale University with a bachelor's in psychology, which will actually be coming up in today's session. We're going to be mentioning a little bit of psychology, like facts here and there, as part of our understanding. I am a writer and editor on Ringle's content team. I am an avid runner, eater, and reader. And my story of the day is back when I was in maybe like sixth or seventh grade, a preteen, my parents insisted on signing me up for Taekwondo classes. So I took Taekwondo, routinely. Like every week we would go and then we would do our sparring. But after a brief period of time, after I got my yellow belt, I quit because I didn't really enjoy the sport. I wasn't a very active kid. I was kind of fat. So that is my Taekwondo story. All right, let's move into today's agenda. All right, so as always, our structure is going to look very similar going forward from this point, right? First 10 minutes, we're going to spend recapping the first 5 chapters that you guys should have gotten a chance to read. Then in the next 35 minutes, the bulk of this section will be spending that looking into a deep read and digest, reading some of the portions, looking into the digestive thoughts, and then we'll be doing a little bit of time doing discussion questions and talking through a lot of the deeper things to explore in the story. And then the next 10 minutes, we'll be doing our guided reading questions, reviewing some of the answers that you guys had for me, as well as some of the answers there. And then in the last 5 minutes, we'll be doing our wrap up, followed by the questions and answers. I hope everyone is as excited as I am. Let's start in the first 10 minutes recapping chapters 1 to 5 that you should have already been reading with a key takeaway for each chapter. All right, so chapter 1, it's called There Are Many Things More Precious Than Money, right? In this chapter, Jaku starts by sort of establishing the scene, right? The kind of family life that he has, the sort of life that he leads. We learn about the familial relationships that keep him going, right? Of his father, the generosity of the father, as well as the familial perspective on education. He does a lot of foreshadowing in this chapter, right? Telling us about events that might be coming further on, right? We learn about how his family looked at life more in general as well, just about the sort of life that one should lead, the sort of philosophy that they had. And he's quite honest about the kind of upbringing he has. He says he's middle class, right around upper middle class at the time, right? But ultimately, the big takeaway of this chapter is that family comes before all, right? For him, family is extremely important. And at the end of the day, family is something that should come before anything else. Going forward in chapter 2, right? You covered the chapter weakness can be turned into hatred, right? So he progresses quickly through the life events that are starting to go on and build up in the story, right? It's all going to be part of the lead up to one of the worst one of the worst camps known to humanity, right? And he puts in context as well for a lot of those historical events that someone mentioned studying as a teen or not studying as a teen, right? He describes Kristallnacht, right? The Night of Broken Glass. And that's something I remember reading about as well in a lot of history classes and not having that actual context. But he, goes into detail about what happens for him or what he sees of Kristallnacht. And then he rapidly transitions into the way his neighbors, right, the people that he lived with, quickly became these antagonists, right? He said his neighbors had shoot the Jewish dogs, or how eager they would be to sort of see him as the enemy, right? And this was where he really lost his German pride and felt like there was more of a shame to be German. The takeaway from this chapter, I thought, is something like it's easy to be selfish, right? At the core of he calls it weakness, right? But I think it's really a human condition of selfishness. A lot of times, you think of yourself first. If it's not me, then I don't want to worry about it. And that can lead into a lot of evils. In chapter 3, Jaku shares his very first experience with internment in a camp, right? The conditions themselves were fairly not ideal, right? Quite not ideal conditions. But what you will realize, and what he kind of mentions, is that they would be a lot better than anything that follows, like further down the line. So this would be as good as it gets when it comes to sort of the prison experience for him, right? But he also doubles this emphasis on a belief, right? And you see it both in the title of the chapter as well as in the general takeaway, right? And the general belief here is that the suffering will someday come to an end. And this is the sort of internal monologue that pushes him all throughout the story. So the title, Tomorrow Will Come If You Survive Today One Step at a Time, is the same as sort of my general takeaway, which is that tomorrow will come. More generally speaking, it is about believing that one step at a time is all it will take to go forward. All right, in chapter 4, it's titled You Can Find Kindness Anywhere, Everywhere, excuse me, even from strangers, right? And so he talks about a very, very daring escape here between him and his father. But unfortunately, there's a moment where his father opts to help someone else during the course of their escape, leading to their ultimate separation, right? Jaku is once again trapped in another camp, but he has an opportunity to walk, and he does so all the way out of the camp, all the way down to the south of France. And throughout this journey, he encounters a lot of kindness, right, from strangers. He encounters some crudeness, but he's ultimately caught to be sent to Auschwitz, one of the worst camps that we'll see, right? And so he's emphasizing again the importance of kindness, especially or even from strangers, right? Kindness is key here. The takeaway is be kind to one another, which is something Ellen used to say. And the final chapter of the reading that you guys were supposed to do before this was chapter 5, where things start peeking up a little bit, right? Hug Your Mother is the title. So Jaku shares this other story of escape out of a train, and then he goes on to take on work to support his family, right? This family, the work happens only at night because he really can't risk being caught in any regard. But he's ultimately still sent to Auschwitz after his family are caught separately, and he does go back home looking for them, right? And then by the end of this chapter, after he sort of goes to the camp and he experiences the camp intake, he learns that his mother and father were murdered. And it's something that was just very straightforward and told to him with no sort of regard. And so his takeaway there is for everyone to, tell parents who love him, love your parents, and let them know about it while you can. So as a brief recap here, right, we're covering a lot of deeper themes and morals that we previously seen in the first part of our reading, right? First part is the family, the importance of keeping family close to you, close at heart, right? The value of friendship, the value of kindness to one another, right? Knowing that you have a friend somewhere can really, really push you to be able to survive through a lot of difficult things. As well as conformity, how easy it can be for social groups and crowds to start conforming to these norms, these understanding about who is good and who is bad and what is good and what is bad, and how easy it is to be evil when one is a little bit selfish and thinking only of themselves, right? So, what are the differences here between themes and morals? Because I mentioned themes and morals both, right? Themes are those recurring ideas or subjects that we're exploring in literature, and it's more often sort of a literature kind of topic, whereas morals are more generally principles of conduct, right? General ideas that are accepted as right or wrong, right? And so Jaku pushes for a lot of these general ideas here that are very, very important about kindness and about friendship. Okay, and that leads us into our read and digest section. Join me in this read and digest section as we pick out some selected passages and look together at what it is. Quick recap on how read and digest works though, right? The goal is to help you learn new expressions in context, understand the nuances of these expressions, and building good habits for reading, right? So throughout the course of each live lecture, we're going to look at those 3 key passages from the reading, and we're going to delve deeper into those yellow highlights being the key expressions, and then purple highlights being some literary analyses, right? This can be helpful for your language skills. So, for our first scene, it comes from chapter 1. There are many things more precious than money, right? So in this scene, Eddie is describing the dark cloud looming over Germany that will lead up to the horror following Hitler's reign. If you have your book, you could join me in chapter 1. If not, we can read on the slide. But there was a cloud over our happy family scene. Germany was in trouble. We had lost the last war and the economy was ruined. The victorious Allied powers demanded more money in reparations than Germany could ever pay back, and 68 million people were suffering. There were food and fuel shortages and rampant poverty, which was keenly felt by the very proud German people. Although we were a comfortable middle-class family, it was not possible to find many necessities, even with ready money. My mother would walk many kilometers to market to exchange handbags and clothes she'd collected in better times for eggs, milk, butter, or bread. For my 13th birthday, my father asked me what I wanted, and I asked for 6 eggs, a loaf of white bread, which was hard to find as Germans prefer rye bread, and a pineapple. I couldn't imagine anything more impressive than 6 eggs, and I had never seen a pineapple. And somehow he found one. I have no idea how, but that was my father. He would do things that seemed impossible just to put a smile on my face. I was so excited that I ate all 6 eggs and the whole pineapple at once. I'd never had so much rich food. Mom warned me to slow down, but did I listen? No. Inflation was terrible, which made it impossible to stock up on non-perishable foods or to plan for the future. My father would come home from work with a valise full of cash that would be worthless by morning. He would send me to the store and say, "Buy whatever you can. If there are 6 loaves of bread, get them all. Tomorrow we will have nothing." It was very hard, even for fortunate people, to live, and the Germans were humiliated and angry. People became desperate and receptive to any solution. The Nazi Party and Hitler promised the German people a solution, and they provided an enemy. So let's start with cloud over, right? At the beginning of the sentence, he says there was a cloud over our happy family scene, meaning there's this sort of visual imagery, right? This depiction of darkness over a sunny day, right? And this acts as that sort of metaphor, foreshadowing a lot of the tensions that are going to come, right? With the global affairs in World War II, it creates that sense of unease. Then next up, we have the sentence about reparations, more money in reparations, right? This is money paid to make up for prior wrongdoings. So a country can agree to pay reparations for the environmental damage caused by the industrial spill. Sometimes in the US, they talk about reparations to certain races of people, sort of like reparations paid off to African Americans for a lot of the sort of suffering in history. People talk about that sometimes. Rampant, right? So Jaku talks about rampant poverty, meaning uncontrolled or spreading everywhere, right? This term highlights this idea that poverty is permeated into all parts of society. You could talk about the rampant spread of a disease, right? The rampant sort of spread of poverty as well. It just is uncontrolled and going quickly. Then we have this phrase, right? Keenly felt, right? He talks about this experience being keenly felt by the German people, meaning that the poverty had a deep and personal impact on the individuals, right? And the phrase at the beginning, he says, the very proud German people, implies that this economic difficulty was really, really challenging because of their strong national identity. And he goes on, and he'll go on to say how that brings them all together in a mutual hatred, right? Then next up, in better times will be a reference to the past, which contrasts the sort of current situation with a previous, more positive state, right? In better times, you can use it in a lot of different ways. In good times, in difficult times, in modern times. So for example, I might say, my bathtub is for bathing myself, but in difficult times, my bathtub can be used to store drinking water, right? Or you might say, in ancient times, people would eat horses. I don't know. I don't know what happens in ancient times. That's an example. All right. Then he goes on to talk about his mother walking kilometers to market as well as his 13th birthday. So his intention in depicting this economic difficulty in tandem with the anecdotes on his own life help to personalize the experience, right? For the reader, they help you connect on this emotional level. You get to visualize what's going on for his birthday, what it's like to want 6 eggs or white bread, right? Or pineapple. And then the 6 eggs segment here, I wanted to just throw in a little bit of extra vocabulary in case you do find yourself running into this as being useful. In American English, we'll often refer to 6 eggs as a half dozen because we use dozens to sort of talk about eggs more generally, right? You go to the grocery store, you buy a dozen eggs, which is 12 eggs, right? So then you have smaller portions, like a half dozen eggs, or you have 2 dozen eggs, or 3 dozen eggs. And that's a unique sort of situation for measure words for eggs in American English, at least. All right. And then going on, he mentions that this was his father who would do things that seemed impossible to put a smile on my face, right? This particular sort of expression is painting that image of this father who, despite the challenge of the time, right? Despite the hard economic and social conditions that we're dealing with, really, really is hoping to spark joy, right? And so this gesture gives context to the economic difficulty, but emphasizes the resilience of the relationship, the strength of the relationship there. So this phrase about coming home with a valise full of cash that'll be worthless by morning, there's a little bit of potential exaggeration making here for effect, right? It's a narrative device exaggeration to make a reader feel the immediacy of, in this case, economic challenges, right? He's like, oh, he has a valise full of cash, but then it's completely worthless by morning. And I'm sure that was close to the truth, but the use of terms like terrible and impossible can add to a sense of urgency and severity to any given description, right? So this is the sort of emphasis on the sort of economic challenges that we're dealing with of the time. And then here he says people became receptive to any solution, right? What does it mean to be receptive to something, right? It means being open or willing to accept something. Oftentimes in this very sort of positive manner, right? Like, oh, they're desperate and they will take on anything. They really want it, right? So it implies here that people's irrational decision-making process makes them susceptible to a lot of radical ideology, right? But you could say, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to be really receptive to any questions you have. I'm also receptive to any feedback you have to make our seminars better, right? Ringo is very receptive to customer feedback. We listen to you and we hope to improve from your feedback. Receptive. And so at this very end of the chapter here, he's talking about how the Nazi parties are promising people a solution and providing an enemy, right? This is the first bit of psychology we're covering. This shared enemy, the shared outgroup idea really does bring people together and it really redirects their frustrations outward, right? In this case, the tool allows the Nazi party to consolidate power, to drive sort of this mutual hatred in times of frustration. Starting with chapter 3, tomorrow will come if you survive today, right? So in this passage, Jaku describes this feeling of freedom, right? A familial contact and of how good freedom can feel after even a short stint in prison. So join me on the slide if you want, or in your book if you have it. They made me sign a contract of employment and a statement to state that they looked after me well. They had fed me and that my time in the camp had been comfortable, and then they made plans for my transfer. As part of the deal, they allowed my father to pick me up from Buchenwald and take me home to spend a few hours with my mom and then escort me to the factory where they would put me to work until the day I died. After Kristallnacht, he and my family had returned to Leipzig and had been quietly waiting for times to get better. Although they wanted to flee Germany, they would not leave me behind. My father was overjoyed, having found an opportunity to win my freedom. On May 2nd, 1939, at 7 a.m., my father picked me up in a hired car. I left Buchenwald 6 months after I'd arrived. My friend, can you imagine how good it felt to leave? For my father to drive up to the gates of Buchenwald and embrace me, to climb into the passenger side and drive off to freedom? This was paradise, a feeling of freedom and the end to persecution. I would remember this feeling often in the years to come and remind myself that if I could survive one more day, an hour, a minute, the pain would end and tomorrow would come. Right? So quick vocabulary here. Made me, right? To make someone do something is to make someone do something by force, right? I was made to take the SAT by my parents. I was made to take Taekwondo by my parents. Things like that. Forced to do something that you don't necessarily want to do. He mentions being escorted to the factory, right? To escort often has this sense of control or oversight over it, right? But escorting someone means accompanying someone to something, right? Will you escort me to the bathroom, please? I will escort you to the mall. Things like that. It's accompanying or guiding, but often for support, right? So I will escort my cousin who doesn't speak English to the shopping center. The next phrase here we have he says, put me to work until the day I die, right? So putting someone to work means here to assign or employ someone to perform these tasks of labor, right? It can also be worded as to work someone in the more active form, right? They're going to work him until the day he dies. And in this context, it implies a sense of control, sense of force, right? You don't say, oh, I'm going to be worked by my company unless it's a really sort of controlling and stressful work environment, right? So this is the sort of difference there. So putting someone to work or being worked has a sort of like intense force or control. And it's not just a matter of like, oh, working a job. And then, of course, he says, until the day I died, right? In this context, he's talking about that lifetime commitment of labor. It's an oppressive sentence, right? And it notes a very bleak future that awaits Jaku, right? With no hope, no escape, or no chance for freedom. And at the very end here, he says they would not leave me behind, right? Leaving someone behind, that phrase always carries that negative implication. It's to abandon them, right? Don't leave me behind here. In this context, it's highlighting this family's willingness to stay together, the importance for the family to care for each other's well-being, despite the desire for each individual to escape a bad situation. Here, Jaku says he had an opportunity, the father had an opportunity to win freedom, right? Win his freedom. You can win or gain a lot of things, right? Physical or otherwise. You can win freedom in this case. You can win money. You can win love, right? A lot of things that you can win and you can gain, right? People go to the casino so that they can win money, right? Every day, someone swipes on a dating app hoping to win love. When he asks you, when he says, my friend, he directly addresses you here, making this sense of camaraderie and connection, right? And he mentions, I am your friend, right? So he invites the readers to empathize with the joy and relief that he felt at this very moment. And it is hard to empathize in a situation like this if you've never really been able to experience it. And he mentions his general feeling of this sort of phenomenon being paradise. This was paradise, right? This is paradise. You can say something is paradise to say the feeling so immensely perfect, so immensely exceptional that it is feeling like a utopia, right? So paradise is the utopia, a place where everything is perfect. But comparing an emotion to paradise, it's like, this is paradise, right? You could say, oh, I went to a restaurant, this delicious restaurant. It was paradise. So Jaku visits this again and again, this positive moment, about positive moments being something to look forward to keep him strong amidst unbearable pain, right? This is his coping strategy. This memory, these positive memories of liberating moments, of happy times with his family, becoming a mental refuge that allows, allows the author to persevere through a lot of difficult times to come. Let's go ahead and move forward into chapter 5 now. Hug your mother. In this passage, Jaku describes a terrible loss of his parents. So join me in chapter 5 or follow along in the slide, please. The Nazis took me into a room and gave me a thin cotton uniform in striped blue and a matching cap. It had the number for my piece of paper printed on the back, and then they put my arm in a sling so I couldn't move, and brutally tattooed the number into my skin so deep it would never fade. It hurt very badly, like being stabbed with 1,000 injections. They gave me a piece of paper to bite down on, so I didn't bite my tongue, but that was all the kindness I would receive that day in that hell on earth. 2 days later, I asked an SS officer where my father had gone. He took me by the arm and led me maybe 50 meters between the barracks and said, "You see the smoke over there? That's where your father went, and your mother, to the gas chambers and the crematorium. This is how I found out I was an orphan. My parents were dead. My father, the strongest, kindest man I had ever known, was now just a memory, not even given the dignity of a burial." And my mother, my poor mother, I did not get a chance to say goodbye to my beloved mother, and I have missed her every day of my life. Every night I still dream of her and sometimes wake up calling out to her. When I was young, all I ever wanted was to be back with her, to spend time with her, to eat the shalash she made on Friday afternoons, to see her smile. And now I never would again. She would never smile again. She was gone, murdered, stolen from me. There is never a day I do not think that I would give everything I have to see her just one more time. If you have the opportunity today, please go home and tell your mother how much you love her. Do this for your mother and do it for your new friend Eddie, who cannot tell it to his mother. Hopefully that inspired some people to talk to their parents. But at the beginning, he talks about the thin cotton uniform, striped blue matching cap. This made me think of the book, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, that I recommended to you guys earlier. There's a discussion about that unique sort of uniform that's striped and it's an attire. It's worn by the individuals who were interned or imprisoned in the concentration camps. So if you see in that picture, it has a very distinct sort of look. It's very recognizable. He mentions here something hurt very badly. Excuse me, hurt very badly, like being stabbed with 1,000 injections, right? It's an example of simile here, right? So a simile is a figure of speech that compares one thing with another using the word like or as, right? So in this case, this imagery creates this vivid imagery that helps the reader visualize and feel the pain he describes, right? Like being stabbed with 1,000 injections. And it's used oftentimes to give a more vivid understanding. And he mentions kindness that he would receive, but in that hell on earth, right? So this phrase is explicit but honest. Hell on earth, encapsulating the brutality and the suffering that he was subject to in that place, right? And he refers to the act of being given a piece of paper to bite down on as an act of kindness, but that is, of course, a bit of an irony, right? A bit of an ironic statement. And it ultimately highlights the cruelty of the Nazi actions, right? So hell on earth is an expression that people use here in like common day-to-day life, but you know, his thing is much more like accurately close to hell on earth, right? You could say, oh, my job is a hell on earth if you hate your job, but again, that's not nearly as extreme as his usage here. In this phrase, he mentions, you know, this is how he finds out that he's an orphan, right? His words are simple, they're very blunt, and they're very forward, and his writing here speaks for itself. There's no need for any sort of embellishment. It's just very, very direct, right? At the end conclusion, he mentions also that his father was not even given the dignity of a burial, right? So to be given the dignity means to receive that respectful treatment, honorable treatment, right? As funerals, it's a sort of dignity for the deceased. And it conveys, in this case, a sense of sorrow, a sense of anger, and a sense of lamentation over the injustice in the way that Jaku's father's remains were treated. Dignity is about sort of humanity. It's about sort of respect, right? And so we talk about to be given dignity is to be given sort of respect. Here he says that his mother was stolen from him, right? And stealing refers to sort of usually the act of stealing someone's property, but in this context, it's more emotionally charged to convey that sense of grief, right? This person was stolen from me. People most often use it in the context of decease, of loss, right? Of death, right? Someone might say, my child was stolen from me by cancer. So this is one of those phrases about sort of emotionally losing someone. And then as the last thing I wanted to point out here, notice again the author is addressing you directly, right? Referring to himself as their new friend, your new friend, Eddie, right? Creating this personal, empathetic, and urgent tone, right? Encouraging you to express your love to your own family. And so hopefully that was a moment that you took in to do so and to express your love as well for your family. All right, and we'll move into our guided reading questions. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes or so covering the guided reading questions for last week that you guys answered. As a quick recap about what guided reading questions are, guided reading questions, the goal here is to help you focus your reading on important material, help you to reflect and summarize those key points and to build your linguistic understanding, right? And so for each live lecture to come, we're going to look into these reading questions together. And until the next week, when I give you the reading questions, please read this portion, reflect on those questions, and share the answers that you have with me. All right, so the guided reading questions for week 2 to think about. 1, why do you think people tend to obey authority? Think about that as you do your reading. 2, why do you think of Eddie's experience thus far? 3, what can we learn from our experiences of World War II? And 4, what do you want to pass on to your children? Right, so those were the things for the week. And then the first question here, some students said, what do you think people tend to obey authority? They said, individuals easily feel insecure when they discover there's no clear right way to do something. It's much easier to follow guidance, so people tend to depend on authority figures to alleviate insecurities, naturally leading them to obey, right? And then someone else said, naturally, when we are born, we're very vulnerable. As humans, we genetically and naturally tend to rely on others to survive. That's why we create gods and religions to provide us with a sense of safety. Right? So a lot of different reasons that people obey authority. And this makes me think of one of the things that I studied in psychology, the Milgram experiments. I don't know if anybody has also studied this in psychology, but they were experimentation that happened shortly after the Holocaust, in which experimenters were led to believe that they were shocking somebody at the order of this scientist. The scientist was like, you must proceed with the experiment. You must continue shocking this person. And despite believing that they were causing harm, 65% of people never disobeyed that authority figure, right? So people just tend to obey authority for one reason or the other. Prior to the experiment, right, the researchers hypothesized maybe the Holocaust was somehow unique. Maybe the German people are uniquely apt to follow and obey authority. But this was conducted in the US, right? And turns out Americans as well had similar issues. I don't think it's unique, of course, to one group of people. All right, let's go ahead and go to question 2. What do you think of Eddie's experiences thus far, right? So some students said, I couldn't say anything about what he experienced as a Jew. It was so very sad. If I were him, I wouldn't be able to write a memoir, right? I wouldn't be able to do it. Someone else says, I've already known the experiences that the Jews suffered through movies, reports, and more, but knowing Eddie's experiences was so bad, and it made me think that Eddie must have wished that he's having a horrible dream, right? So absolutely, right? The experiences are horrific, and they only really get more dramatically worse. So reading Eddie's experiences brings to life this personal account of the horrors of the Holocaust for me as well, right? It's something we study, but we don't get to sort of see from the first person so often. And they also remind me of the capabilities of mankind, how people in power are so capable of great evil, right? capable of good as well. But question number 3 was, what can we learn from our experiences of World War II? Right? A lot of people mentioning we should not start another world war. We should not start another world war. Hopefully, we're not on the precipice of that. It'll separate people from their families. It destroys everything we have and causes confusion. And humans are susceptible to the surrounding situations. We're easily swept along with good or bad things, and humans can be angels and devils both. Right? I think everyone was in agreement that war is never a good idea. Right? History teachers that I've talked to throughout my school life always say history allows you to learn from our mistakes, and yet if you really look into history, it just kind of looks like we're making our mistakes over and over again. But that's the big question here. Are we really learning from our mistakes? How are we learning from our mistakes? Right? And then the final question, I loved a lot of your answers, guys. If I could choose them all and put them on, I would have. But what do you want to pass on to your children, right? So one student says, I like to teach my children that money isn't everything in life, but they still need it to achieve their goals and have more freedom to choose what they want and need. To that end, I want to support my children with a quality education so that they can find ways to become independent and develop themselves. Someone else says, love is what I've got from my parents. Everything can be achieved by oneself if one tries, but love is the only thing that comes from elsewhere, right? Love comes from someone else. And so the value of love is what this person wanted to pass down. We'll be revising and revisiting this theme in another occasion, but Eddie really emphasizes that importance, right, of love, and then occasionally further on, making sure not to pass on that hatred, that trauma, and that anger on the children, because that can be something that's very easy to do. And so making sure that we pass on only the positive things. All right. And for our next section of reading, chapters 6 to 10, please choose at least one of these questions to think about, right? Number 1 is, do you think people with power over others are bound to abuse this power, right? Number 2, how important is education? How important is education? Number 3 is, do you agree with Jaku that for every cruel person in the world, there is a kind one? Do you agree with that statement? And then finally, what would you change about how you're living now if you realize you had only 1 year left to live? How would you sort of adjust your life, and why aren't you making those adjustments in the day-to-day? So those are the questions to think about in the last section of your reading. All right, in the final 5 minutes of our time together, I wanted to take a moment to wrap up. Last 5 minutes, let's start with a quick summary. So today we talked about the morals and the value and importance of hope, kindness, and gratitude shared by Jaku. And then we talked a little bit about these values that you have in your day-to-day life. I encourage everyone to try and integrate a lot of these positive values shared by Jaku into your day-to-day. Mindfulness can help you de-stress when you're feeling overwhelmed. Journal, meditate, and most importantly, express gratitude. Jaku mentions all of the nightmares, but as well as how lucky he feels at many times in the story. And so think about how grateful you are for the life that you have and with the things that you have in your life. Who and what are you grateful for? Right? Let's go ahead and move forward now. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I really appreciate everyone being here. I really enjoyed the session, and I hope everyone enjoys their next reading. I wish you all a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next week.